Well, hello again, friends. Good to be back here with you. And we are back for our next conversation and presentation and time together with a look at the results and feedback from our Convocation survey, which closed just recently in October. So, as we talked about in our first conversation together, the goals of convocations are mainly to increase collaboration among our congregations, to imagine and begin new and combined ministries, and to offer moments to gather together, to build new relationships, and to offer fellowship as members of one church and of one diocese. So, how does a congregational survey help us to work towards those goals? Why do a survey in the first place? Well, three main reasons. One, we have to know ourselves. We realize that we may have a good idea of what our strengths can be or have been in the past, but we wanted to offer the opportunity for every congregation and vestry and convocation to have that conversation anew. When we are most honest about our gifts and our strengths and our weaknesses, we then approach our convocation goals from an informed sense of who we are and what we would like to do. Then we want to have a better look at our 5 priorities of the Diocese of Bethlehem, which are fairly new, all things considered. Our hope is that some of our questions and quotes will help us appreciate which of the priorities we want to engage the most or the earliest. So maybe it leads to a conversation in your congregation or in your assembly about what congregational vitality actually means and looks like, and also for what might new ministry look like when it comes to, for example, advocacy for the most vulnerable. Maybe these are some topics that we haven't thought about in a long time in some of our settings. Finally, we wanted to offer a first step of including as many people as wanted to participate. So we had 228 survey responses, about 90% of which were from lay people. So that was great. Certainly, no survey is perfect, and some of our questions were more generated towards the laity. Yet we now have a tangible set of data and a different perspective from this time in our history for telling our story, for discussion and discernments in moments like this at a clergy conference, or for your assemblies and your congregations to work with soon. So we had 2 sections in our survey. Section 1 was related to congregational ministry. We offered 30 statements corresponding to 5 categories: pastoral care and parish life, service and community engagement, worship and our Sunday mornings, Christian formation, and finally, stewardship. Responses to these 30 statements ranged from 1 to 5 regarding how much a certain phrase resonated with a participant, 1 being not at all, 5 being completely, and 3 both as the middle of the road or if not applicable. So let's see how we got on. These figures are averages for all participants across the diocese that took the survey. In a few minutes, we'll look at the clergy versus lay breakdown to see what that looks like as well. Also, you should have a handout that has the average responses for each individual phrase, if that is of interest to you. It's worth noting here that our top response, the pastoral care and parish life category, would have been even higher, but was brought lower by a question about the amount of offerings for kids and youth. So it scored very well. It's worth noting here that our top 2 categories are strongly based in the idea of church as community itself and as part of a greater community within we are where we sit. Questions about the care that our congregations are offering to our members scored very well, as did the idea of partnering in our community with other organizations. Coming in third, notably in the worship category, preaching was scored very highly, so well done, preachers. Interestingly, the score that brought the category down was the question about if participants were open to changing something about our Sunday mornings. So maybe there is some potential there for interesting conversation in your parish. Christian formation did have some good and honest answers, at least, even though it comes fourth. One of the lowest responses overall for the whole thing was about how many parishioners actually participate in the Christian education offerings that we do offer. Again, food for thought. And lastly, stewardship. This came last for 2 reasons, I think. 1, a lack of perhaps a proper conversation about year-round stewardship in our congregations. And 2, a lack of conversations at a local level concerning energy conservation and creation care. So those results for our ministry first section. Let's have a look at section 2 now, about the 5 priorities of the Diocese of Bethlehem. Here we put together 3 groups of 5 quotes, each corresponding to one of the priorities: lay and clergy formation, racial justice and advocacy for the most vulnerable, diocesan partnerships, vibrant and stable congregations, and finally, creating new faith communities. The scoring here will look lower because by design, we made sure there were 5 distinct answers in each section of 5 quotes. So you had to give 1-1, 1-2, 1-3, 1-4, and 1-5. So unlike the first section, you couldn't just give 5s and 4s for everything, which is what a lot of people did. We were kind of going for a sense of forced honesty, if you will. So let's see what that looked like in the results. As you can see, this was much more of a mixed bag. Interestingly, though it came 4th out of 5 in the ministry section, formation scored very well here. I wonder if that means our people really do have a desire for this deep down, but maybe they haven't tried it as much or seen the kinds of things that our congregations are offering and then jumped into them. So at least there's some potential there. Right there at the top as well with formation was racial justice and advocacy for the most vulnerable, tied for first. This is a great sign, as I think both the work of our task force comes through in an answer like this, and perhaps just our overall response as faithful people, recognizing that these are topics that are not just political or not just in one sort of secular conversation in nature, but are very much part of the church's mission, and that we feel it's our responsibility to address them. So that's a really good sign. In the middle of the road came diocesan partnerships, then vibrant and stable congregations. Both of these brought down, unfortunately, not much love for either the Rachel Held Evans quote or the Dietrich Bonhoeffer quote, 2 of my favorites. Oh well. Then rounding out the 5 is creating new faith communities. So honestly, that probably doesn't come as much of a surprise to us. For as much as in these kinds of conversations, we're talking about trying new things, it's a big ask for most. And perhaps understandably, the idea of creating new faith communities, though of course that can mean different things to different people, is a bit much for those who might see their own congregations struggling. Going forward, we may need to have more of a sort of an offering of our understanding of what we really mean by that phrase, to create new faith communities. It can mean church planting, it can mean official partnerships, but it can also mean, for example, Spanish-speaking congregations or who knows what. But it's a pretty varied phrase that maybe our folks don't quite understand as well as we'd hoped so far, but that's okay. We'll get there. So for fun, let's look briefly at some of the differences between lay responses and clergy responses. Admittedly, we have a smaller sample size of clergy responses, but that's kind of how it is in real life. Far more lay people than there are clergy people. For our survey responses, the overall was about 90% lay and 10% clergy. So not bad. Let's see what it looked like. So here in the numbers, you're seeing the white categories are where the difference was less than 5%. Green and yellow mean there was a difference greater than 5%, with the green figure being the higher one. So this is for our ministry, our first section, and perhaps the most telling thing here, either lay people are generally just more positive about what's happening in our congregations, or perhaps clergy are slightly more honest or cynical. I don't know. But clergy tended to score lower in most things. The lay people tended to score higher. The biggest differences here, of course, being worship and Sunday mornings, as you can see, and then stewardship. So we'll get to some of the individual responses that make that really interesting in just a few moments. Let's look at the 5 priorities next, though. Looking at the same breakdown here, clergy score higher in the organizational categories, which maybe comes as no surprise, with both diocesan partnerships and vibrant, stable congregations significantly higher than the lay responses. The biggest difference for the laity came from the quotes regarding racial justice and advocacy. So we'll see why in a second. There were some big differences in some of the individual responses. I'll leave this up here for a second. Okay. So, of course, data can't show the entire story of any of these topics, but it can offer us some telling trends. I want to show you a handful of slides here that gives us a glimpse at one trend in particular when clergy and lay were off by 10% or more. So here's the first one. My church has active collaborative relationships with other churches in my neighborhood. The lay people scoring higher by a difference of 10%. Now, this is a good representation of a larger theme, that one or both of the following statements are probably true. One, lay people think higher of what the church does, or think we have more going on, period. This came out in numerous questions where the lay people scored higher than the clergy. Categories like youth ministry, community relationships, preaching, music, opportunities on Sunday mornings for all ages, a lot of different categories where the lay responses were either higher or significantly higher than what we as clergy scored. So that's one possibility here. The second possibility, a little more charitably, is that lay people maybe want to believe that these are either more true than they are, or more of a possibility than clergy think they are. Maybe our lay people believe in our success a little bit more than we do. Either way, each of the following slides will show the laity thinking higher of each statement or hoping they are more accurate than maybe we do. Let's see what other ones we have. Now, this is the only one of these handful that I might harp on a little bit. Here it goes. If more people knew how good our worship was, we'd have more visitors and members. So we put this statement in here to see how we'd respond to the idea of build it and they will come as a mentality, which we all know isn't really the model of ministry that Jesus shows us in the Gospels. This is an attractional model and, frankly, an attractive idea for most. One that perhaps tells us about how much we do value our buildings and attracting people to our main offering, which for most places is going to be worship. I think this shows the tendency of some of our folks, and clergy are not exempt from this, to desire maybe hearkening back to the good old days when more of our society was churched and more people were exposed to good liturgy and knew that that's what church meant. In some of our assembly meetings, there was a genuine frustration, though, at why this isn't happening more. Some of our members desperately want an answer to why more people aren't showing up at their church doors. Now, obviously, that is a complex question that doesn't have a single answer. And on some level, it does come from a good place, a desire for other people to know what they know and to feel what they feel and to be a part of what they are in a church community. So on some level, I can't really fault people for that. And it would be nice if that's all we had to do. But of course, we are also a people called to go out into the world, not just to wait for people to come to our front doors. So questions of numbers and membership, of course, won't be solved only by the hope of people experiencing our worship. And again, we did see this in our assembly meetings. People are frustrated by this, but there is a lay answer higher by a difference of 11%, but also something clergy probably wanted as well. Next, my parish provides good preparation for people who would like to be baptized or confirmed. Again, lay higher by a difference of 11%. So maybe lay people think we are doing this preparation better than clergy think they are themselves. It might be true, it might not, but it does open an interesting window about what does this preparation look like in our parishes and how informed is the average lay person about how we prepare for these sacramental moments. If they are scoring higher, maybe they know something we don't, or maybe they've had a good experience when you have offered that to them and their families for baptism or confirmation. But again, clergy high or lay higher by a difference of 11%. This was the big one. This was the biggest discrepancy of the entire survey. My congregation talks about stewardship in times other than our pledge campaign. The lay higher by a whopping difference of 26%. I wonder why this is the case. Clergy were absolutely more honest about this question. And some years, let's be honest, even pulling off a good stewardship in the fall campaign in the fall is challenging enough. But couple this with stewardship scoring lowest in our section 1 about ministry, and we might want to think about why there could be a disconnect in what we're doing for stewardship in general and what we and our congregations believe it to mean to us outside of money and campaigns. Speaking from personal experience, there are two things I think that might play into that. We say all the time, talent, treasure. that might be sort of buzzwordy at this point, and I'm not sure everyone exactly knows what that means, but it may be a phrase that isn't quite serving us the way we think it is, and maybe it's not connecting in ways that we'd hoped. Also, what resources are we using? What do our campaigns even look like? And do they prepare us to have that conversation in other ministries, in other times of the year, and in conversations that aren't about money? Sometimes they are, sometimes they're not. I know, again, in my own experience, we pretty heavily adapted the TENS program because we weren't really satisfied with all that it offered. And we also wanted our people to hear from our people. There were so many letters from people that we'd never heard of talking about, our, for example, money or finances, that we kind of thought maybe it's better for us to hear from each other and talk about that in more of a local way than more of a sort of a generalized way. So anyway, an interesting conversation about stewardship and how much more the lay people think perhaps it's more effective than we think it is. So we'll see what happens with that data. Finally, and this is probably my favorite, only because I love these two quotes, but I think it's also very interesting about how much more highly the lay people scored it, with 25% higher. These two quotes, one from Augustine and one from Madeline L'Engle. I'll just read them real fast for us. So from St. Augustine, what does love look like? It has the hands to help others. It has the feet to hasten to the poor and the needy. It has eyes to see misery and want. It has the ears to hear the sighs and sorrows of men. That is what love looks like. And then from Madeline L'Engle, we have to be braver than we can be. We have to be braver than we think we can be, because God is constantly calling us to more than we are. Lay people think this more than we do, friends. I wonder what they're trying to tell us. I don't have a whole lot more commentary there, but I would love to hear your thoughts about why this scored so much higher for lay folks. So, of course, there's even more data we can look at. And if you'd like to do that, I am totally here for it. Let me know and we can have that conversation personally. But let's get to some closing thoughts and conclusions. Let's consider some strengths, some concerns, and some final questions. First, our strengths. Very clearly, from what the data suggests, pastoral care is a gift of this diocese. And just from my own experience, I would say it's a gift of our bishop and our communities as well. This consistently scored just about as high as it could get. And even with a couple of the questions maybe suggesting we have a bit of COVID fatigue around the idea of pastoral care, this is absolutely a charism of our diocese. So there's a good first step. Second, a yearning to be together in just about everything we do. That scored well in worship, in fellowship, and to a lesser extent, but not nothing, for formation. So what are we inviting each other to? What might some of those events look like? How can we do that together? The same questions we've been asking all over the place very much sort of ring true in the data that we've received. Third, we see the need to engage our towns and our communities. We also have the desire to do it. Those are two very different things. Seeing the need is one thing, but actually wanting to do it is another. And from what we've seen in the data, we've got both. So we have an energy for doing something that is outside of our walls, even though those walls scored very highly in our building questions. But that's a good thing. I'm glad we have a heart for reaching out to others and reaching out to our communities in ways that we maybe haven't before. Finally, racial justice and lay and clergy formation did score very well, especially in the second section. So those are maybe the two priorities that won't be the easiest to jump into, but perhaps are the places where our people are trending. And that's a good thing. We have avenues for each of those. And especially with some diocesan things coming up, and I'm sure things in your parish, these are things we can build on, it sounds like, right away in terms of the opinions of our folks. Next, let's look to some things of some growing edges, some concerns, and where can we improve? So we did score very highly with knowing our physical buildings as a big part of our identity. This has to be true on some level. I mean, it is where we gather the most often. And especially after 2 years of COVID, this is expected. People want to get back to their setting, to seeing each other in the place that is comfortable and that is home for them. And the question still remains, for many of our folks, is the church more the building, or is the church more its people as the body of Christ? Next, youth and family ministry was probably our lowest, consistently low score among all of our questions. And again, that may not come as a surprise. We heard that a lot in terms of some of the challenges that our assembly members talked about. So yeah, there's a need here, but I also continue to wonder, as did some people in our assemblies, not only what the best step forward is for this question, but also if we have the tendency to make a false equivalency and a hope of more kids equals more vibrant church. It can, but it doesn't always. And so sometimes the idea of youth ministry becomes this sort of white whale of, if that's the only thing we need to fix, everything will be great again. And I think we know that's not necessarily the case, but it is something that consistently came up in our meetings for people that they wanted to talk about it and they wanted to offer more. Great chance for collaboration there. But again, it's not the be all and end all, I think. Next, stewardship. So often stewardship tends to be treated as only the following. First, a term about money. Second, when it is talked about, it's only in October and November. And third, not really related to a robust, broader conversation about mission and identity. So how do we change this? What does a healthy stewardship drive really look like? How do we talk faithfully and effectively about stewardship in February or July or involved with our other ministries? And are our current resources helping us or hindering us sometimes? Questions for thought. After that, even though formation did score well, and it was in one of our strengths of the second part of the survey, our parishioners' participation in our formation efforts often did score poorly, and I think we know that. Not really a surprise, but the question remains, how do we engage more of our congregation with these great things that you're putting together and writing and offering for Christian formation? Finally, the idea of change. The statement of, I wouldn't change anything about my congregation's Sunday morning offered pretty mixed results, but not without suggesting that some change was possible. At the same time, new faith communities easily scored last among the 5 priorities. We all know change in the church is difficult and takes time and takes care, but we all might do well to use part of our time here as well as in the future to see what kind of honest conversations we might be able to have about change and about new things in our diocese. One of our bishop's favorite phrases is, it's time for us to be truth tellers. That came up over and over again in some of our meetings in the last 6 months. And that might involve the idea of change. It might involve the idea of lots of different things in terms of this new venture. But the more we name it and the more we talk about where change is possible and where it's actually fruitful for the life of the church, will be a good thing for sure. So finally, in closing, here are some questions for your time together in your convocation groups, as well as if we do have time for a sort of a phone question and answer. So what surprised you the most? Maybe there was a number that jumped off the page or something that completely went the opposite the way that you thought it would when you took the survey. What surprised you the most? Next, what might this data teach us? I've offered a few of the conclusions I think it might be telling us, but you may be sitting there saying, nope, I see it opposite, or I see it really differently. I would love to hear your thoughts about where you think this data might help us move forward and what it's teaching us now and perhaps in the future. What needs to change? What about what we're doing isn't working that it could use sort of a refreshing and a renewal in what we do? And what needs to stay the same? There is good news in this. There is good news in our congregations of some of the things we've tried and some of the ministries we're doing and some of the outreach and community service that we've tried. There were some very hopeful responses in this. And that's what my biggest takeaway is, especially with the lay people, that perhaps there is a greater hope for what we can do together than maybe we first imagined. So thanks again for your help with taking this survey and asking your folks to do it and providing this wonderful data. And thanks so much for your attentiveness again and your time today. I look forward to what we can continue to learn together from our survey and from our conversations, and I'll talk to you soon. Thanks again.